Let me share something with you that happened in emergency departments across the UK and the US every single week. Someone comes in with chest pain, with shortness of breath, or early diabetic complications. We run their blood tests, their HbA1c comes back elevated, their lipid profile looks concerning, and we have what we call the conversation. I tell them they need to change their diet. They nod seriously, they promise that they will, and for the next 3 months, many of them actually do. Then I see them again 6 months later, and everything has drifted back to baseline. The same numbers, the same trajectory, the same quiet resignation. Hi, I'm Dr. Alex. I'm an emergency medicine doctor, and after nearly 10 years in the A&E, I've seen what happens when preventable disease isn't prevented. And my goal now is to help people avoid it in the first place and live longer, healthier lives. So this diet pattern is so reliable that I started tracking it. Not officially, just mentally noting when patients came back after attempting dietary changes. The timeline was strikingly consistent. Most people held their new behaviours for somewhere between 8 to 12 weeks. Then something invisible happened. There was no dramatic collapse, no single moment of giving up, just a gradual, quiet return to exactly where they started. If diet advice works so reliably for 90 days, why does it fail so predictably after that? This isn't a motivational problem. That's the comfortable explanation that we reach for because it protects the advice itself. If the problem is motivation, then the program was fine and the person just wasn't committed enough. But I've watched too many deeply committed people fail at this. Entrepreneurs who run companies, athletes who compete nationally, medical students who ace their exams. These are not people lacking discipline or drive, yet they follow the same pattern. Early success, growing confidence, then somewhere around week 12, the whole thing starts to unravel. So what I want to do in this video is explain exactly why that happens. Not with psychology or mindset frameworks, but with physiology. Because the 90-day collapse isn't random. It's built into how your brain learns, how your metabolism adapts, and how modern diet programs are structured. And once you understand the mechanism, you can see why fixing it requires a completely different approach to what most people are being told to do. Now, just a quick question before we carry on with the video. I see messages and comments from people all the time who've watched a few of my videos and didn't realize that they weren't actually subscribed. So would you mind doing me a quick favor and just double checking that you are? It's free, it takes 2 seconds, and it genuinely helps this channel keep making videos like this and keep the whole thing moving in the right direction and helping more people like you. And if you are subscribed, then thank you. You're not just watching, you're part of this story now, and I really appreciate you being on the journey with me. So to explain this 90-day collapse properly, we need to zoom in on the window itself, because that timeline is not arbitrary. It maps onto how the brain rewards change and how the body starts pushing back once the novelty fades. The first time somebody commits to a diet change, their brain experiences something called prediction error. This is the technical term for when reality doesn't match the expectation. You expect to eat certain foods at certain times in certain quantities. Then you deliberately break that pattern. Your brain notices that. And in those early days, noticing creates neurological activity. That activity triggers dopamine release. Not because healthy food tastes better than junk food, but because the change itself is novel. Your brain rewards you for doing something different. This is why the first 2 weeks of any diet feel surprisingly manageable. You're not operating on pure willpower. You're getting neurochemical support for the novelty of the behavior. The problem is that dopamine reward isn't tied to the behavior being healthy. It's tied to the behavior being new. By week 6, the prediction error shrinks. Your brain has updated its model. Eating differently is no longer novel. It's just what you do now. The dopamine support fades, and at this point, the behavior has to transition from novelty-driven to habit-driven. And habit formation follows a different timeline. Habit circuitry stabilization takes somewhere between 8 to 12 weeks to properly consolidate, which means there's a gap, a period where the neurochemical novelty reward has worn off, but the habit automation hasn't fully locked in yet. And during that gap, the behavior becomes effortful. You're no longer getting dopamine hits for doing it, and you're not yet doing it automatically. You're in the middle, and the middle is where metabolic compensation starts to kick in. When you reduce your calorie intake, your metabolism doesn't just accept it. Your body interprets restriction as a threat. Hunger hormones like ghrelin increase. Satiety signals like leptin decrease. Your basal metabolic rate adjusts downward to protect your energy stores. This isn't failure. This is adaptive physiology. Your metabolism is doing exactly what it evolved to do, to resist sustained caloric deficit. By week 10, you're dealing with elevated hunger, with reduced satiety, slower metabolic rate, and no more dopamine reward for your efforts. The only thing keeping the behavior going at this point is conscious decision-making, which brings us to the real problem. Willpower is not unlimited. It operates on biological systems that can be measured and depleted. And this is the point that most programs completely ignore. Because once the novelty support fades and the physiology starts resisting, what you're left relying on is willpower, and willpower has a ceiling. Most people think of willpower as a character trait. You either have it or you don't. But willpower is actually a cognitive resource that runs on glucose. It depends on sleep and it gets depleted by stress. When I talk about willpower failing at 90 days, I'm not talking about moral weakness. I'm talking about a biological system running out of fuel. Decision-making happens in the prefrontal cortex. That region requires glucose to function. When you're in a calorie deficit, your blood glucose becomes less stable. When blood glucose drops, cognitive control weakens, and this is measurable. Decision fatigue studies show that judges are more likely to grant parole early in the day when glucose is high and then deny it later in the same day when glucose is low. The same cognitive system you use for legal decisions is the system you use to resist the biscuit tin at work. And on top of that, diet changes usually coincide with other stresses, with work deadlines, family demands, sleep disruption. Every stressor elevates cortisol, and cortisol directly impairs prefrontal cortex function, which means that your capacity to override impulses weakens exactly when you need it most. The person attempting dietary changes at 90 days is operating with less glucose stability, with higher cortisol, and often worse sleep than they had in week 1. The system designed to regulate their choices is compromised. And then here's where it compounds. When willpower fails once, it triggers emotional response. Guilt, frustration, shame. These emotions further elevate your cortisol, which further impairs decision-making, which makes the next lapse more likely. It's not a slippery slope, it's a biochemical cascade. One cookie doesn't ruin a diet, but the cortisol spike from the guilt about the cookie absolutely can. The tragedy is that most people interpret this cascade as personal failure. They think they weren't strong enough, but strength has nothing to do with it. They were operating a glucose-dependent, cortisol-sensitive, sleep-fragile cognitive system under sustained metabolic stress. Willpower didn't fail. The conditions required for willpower to function were systematically dismantled. So, even if someone manages to push through that willpower phase, there's still something deeper going on because the body isn't neutral about weight loss or restriction. It has a set point it tries to defend. So even if somebody manages to sustain willpower through the 90-day window, there's a deeper problem. The body doesn't just adapt to dietary change, it actively resists it. This is what we call homeostasis, and it's one of the most powerful forces in human physiology. When you lose body fat, your adipose tissue doesn't disappear quietly. Fat cells secrete leptin, a hormone that signals satiety to your brain. As fat mass decreases, leptin drops. Lower leptin means weaker satiety signals. Your brain interprets this as starvation risk and increases hunger drive to compensate. At the same time, ghrelin, the hunger hormone, this goes up. So you're simultaneously less satisfied by food and more driven to seek it. This is why people describe feeling hungrier at month 3 than they did at month 1, even though they've adapted to the routine. They have adapted behaviorally, but their endocrine system is working against them hormonally, and hormones are far stronger than habits. A well-formed habit can be overridden by a sufficiently strong hunger signal, because hunger isn't just a feeling, it's a survival mechanism with direct hypothalamic control. On top of that hormonal resistance, there's metabolic adaptation. When you sustain a calorie deficit, your body reduces non-exercise activity thermogenesis. You fidget less, you take fewer steps without noticing, your body conserves energy subconsciously. Your basal metabolic rate drops. So the same calorie intake that created a deficit in week 1 creates a smaller deficit by week 12. Weight loss slows, progress stalls, and the psychological impact of stalled progress is significant. When progress stops, motivation weakens, not because people are fickle, but because the brain is a prediction machine. If effort no longer produces visible results, the brain deprioritizes that effort. This is rational resource allocation. Why continue investing energy in a behavior that no longer delivers returns? The problem is that the behavior is still working. It's just working against incredibly powerful opposition. But without visible feedback, that distinction is invisible. So by day 90, you have someone fighting elevated hunger, reduced satiety, slower metabolic rates, stalled visible progress, and depleted willpower. All of this while the advice that they were given assumed none of this would happen. The advice treated behavior change as a static challenge, but the body is dynamic. It adapts, it compensates, and it resists. And if the program doesn't account for that, failure isn't just possible, it's biologically inevitable. And if you zoomed out, this is where the real mismatch appears, because most diet advice assumes humans change through information and intention. But brains don't learn that way. They learn through feedback. If you want to understand why diet advice fails, you need to understand how the brain learns behavior in the first place. And the mechanism is surprisingly simple. The brain learns through prediction error and immediate consequence. When an action produces an unexpected result, the brain updates its model. When that result is immediate, the learning is strong. When the result is delayed, the learning is weak. This is why addiction is so powerful. Nicotine hits the bloodstream in 7 seconds, cocaine in 3, alcohol in a few minutes. The behavior and the consequence are tightly coupled. The brain learns the association instantly. The same mechanism explains why social media is so effective. You pull down to refresh and you get a dopamine hit within milliseconds. Scroll, stimulation. Click, reward. The feedback loop is immediate. Now, compare that to diet change. You eat a salad for lunch. What happens immediately? Nothing rewarding. You might feel a bit virtuous, but there's no tangible psychological payoff. The benefit, if it exists, is abstract and distant. Lower HbA1c in 3 months, reduced cardiovascular risk over decades, weight loss over a few weeks. None of those timelines align with how the brain learns. In fact, the immediate consequence of eating the salad might be continued hunger if the meal wasn't satisfying enough. So the brain gets a negative signal: behavior performed, reward absent, mild discomfort present. That's the opposite of reinforcement. That's punishment. And punishment weakens behavior. Meanwhile, the alternative behavior, which is eating something more calorie-dense and palatable, delivers immediate reward. Taste, texture, satiety, glucose spike, a mood lift, all within minutes. The brain gets clear feedback. This behavior produces reward, that behavior produces nothing. Over repeated trials, the brain will favor the behavior with immediate positive consequence. Not because it's better long-term, but because the learning system is built for immediate feedback. This is the fundamental mismatch. Diet advice asks you to sustain a behavior with delayed abstract, invisible benefits while resisting behaviors with immediate, tangible, reliable rewards. And it expects you to do that using conscious willpower alone. No cognitive system can sustain that asymmetry indefinitely. Eventually, the immediate feedback wins. The only way behavior change sticks long term is if it produces some form of immediate, repeatable, positive consequence. It doesn't have to be pleasure. It can be relief, clarity, energy, or progress. But it has to happen soon enough for the brain to connect the behavior to the outcome. Without that connection, the behavior remains effortful, and effortful behaviors don't survive contact with real life. So if immediate feedback drives learning, and willpower has biological limits, and your metabolism actively resists sustained restriction, then what actually works? Well, the answer isn't more discipline, it's better structure. Because the programs that succeed past 90 days aren't the ones with the most motivated people. They're the ones that remove the need for motivation in the first place. This is what I see in lifestyle medicine research, and it's what I've watched work in clinical practice. The people who sustain dietary change long-term don't have superhuman willpower. They've built environments where the default option is the healthy option. They've removed decision points. They've automated the behavior. Think about meal timing. If you eat at inconsistent times, every meal becomes a decision. What should I eat? When should I eat? And how much should I eat? 3 decisions, 3 opportunities for willpower depletion. 3 chances for the brain to default to immediate reward. But if you eat at the same time every day, the decision is gone. The behavior becomes time-triggered. Your brain stops treating it as optional. The same applies to food availability. If your kitchen contains both healthy and unhealthy options, every time you're hungry becomes a willpower test. But if you only stock foods that align with your goals, then there's no test. The choice is pre-made. This isn't about restriction, it's architecture. You're designing your environment so that the path of least resistance leads to the outcome that you want. And then this extends to social structure. The research on this is very clear. Dietary change is significantly more likely to stick when it's embedded in social accountability. Not because shame works, but because external feedback creates the immediate consequences the brain needs. You commit to a friend that you'll eat a certain way. That evening, they check in. That check-in is immediate feedback. Your brain registers it. The behavior gets reinforced. This is why group-based lifestyle medicine programs consistently outperform individual advice. It's not the information that's different, it's the feedback structure. Weekly weigh-ins, group discussions, shared meals, all of these create immediate social consequence. And social consequence is one of the few things powerful enough to compete with food reward. And here's what most people miss when they think about sustainable change. You're not just changing what you eat, you're changing when you eat, where you eat, who you eat with, and what eating means to you. The programs that fail at 90 days treat diet as a list of foods. Eat this, don't eat that. But eating isn't just nutrient delivery, it's social connection, it's stress relief for a lot of people, it's boredom management, it's celebration and comfort. If you remove the food someone uses for those functions without replacing the functions themselves, you haven't created change. You've created deprivation. And deprivation doesn't last. This is where lifestyle medicine diverges from traditional diet advice. Lifestyle medicine asks what role food plays in your life right now. If you eat biscuits at your desk because you're stressed, the solution isn't stronger willpower around biscuits. The solution is addressing the stress. Maybe that's a 5-minute walk between tasks. Maybe it's a conversation with your manager about workload. Maybe it's fixing your sleep so your cortisol isn't chronically elevated. But until the underlying driver changes, the behavior won't. The same applies to social eating. If your weekend revolves around restaurant meals with friends, telling you to meal prep and stay home isn't sustainable. It's just isolating. The solution isn't removing the social interaction, it's restructuring it. order differently, suggest activities that don't center around food. The goal isn't perfection. It's building a version of your life where health-supporting behaviors fit naturally into your actual routines. And this is the piece that takes time, not 90 days, more like 6 to 12 months, because you're not just forming a new habit, you're rebuilding identity. You're shifting from someone who occasionally eats healthy when motivated to someone who just eats this way. That shift doesn't happen through information. It happens through repeated exposure, environmental redesign, and gradual recalibration of what feels normal. The people I see succeed long-term aren't following diets. They've built systems. They've made the healthy choice the easy choice. They've removed friction from desired behaviors and added friction to undesired ones. They've embedded accountability. They've addressed the emotional and social function food was serving. And critically, they've given themselves permission for the process to take longer than just 90 days. Because here's the truth nobody wants to hear. If you're trying to change decades of eating patterns, 90 days isn't enough. The research on habit formation shows massive individual variation. Some behaviors lock in at 8 weeks, others take 8 months. The 90-day window isn't when change completes, it's when the first phase of neurochemical support ends and the real work begins. This is when most programs declare victory and step back. But stepping back at 90 days is like stopping antibiotics halfway through the course. You haven't eradicated the problem, you've just paused it. The programs that work past 90 days don't end at 90 days, they transition. The first 3 months focus on behavior establishment. The next 3 months focus on obstacle navigation. You encounter your first holiday, your first stressful work period, your first social event where everyone's eating differently. These aren't failures, they are training scenarios, and navigating them successfully requires support, not isolation. This is why I'm such a strong advocate for ongoing lifestyle medicine follow-up, not because people need indefinite hand-holding, but because the environmental and metabolic challenges don't stop at 90 days. Hormonal adaptation continues, life stresses emerge, social pressure persists. Having a structure that anticipates these challenges and provides tools to navigate them is the difference between sustained change and predictable relapse. And the final piece is redefining what success looks like. If success means perfect adherence to a meal plan, you're setting yourself up for binary thinking. One deviation equals failure. But if success means progressively building a life where healthy eating is the default most of the time, then occasional deviations aren't failures. They're data. What triggered that? What can I learn? How do I adjust the system? This is the mindset shift that separates temporary change from permanent transformation. You're not fighting your physiology, you're working with it. You're not relying on willpower, you're building infrastructure. And you're not expecting change in 90 days. You're investing in change over a realistic timeline that accounts for how brains and bodies actually work. So if you've tried diets before and found yourself back where you started around the 3-month mark, then you weren't weak. You weren't unmotivated. You were operating inside a system that was biochemically designed to fail at exactly that point. The advice you followed didn't account for the metabolic adaptation, the willpower depletion, or the feedback structures humans actually need to sustain behavior. The solution isn't simply trying harder. It's understanding the mechanism and building a different structure. One that reduces decision fatigue, creates immediate feedback, addresses the functions food serves in your life, and extends support past the point where neurochemical novelty fades. That is what works. That's what the evidence shows. And that's what I'm here to help you build. So if you like this video, then click the subscribe button, and I'll see you in the next one.